Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Candace Carnahan. Welcome, Candace. Always glad to have an interview with you.
Oh, it's so nice to be invited back. I can't believe you want to hear more from me.
Oh, we certainly do. Last November, you gave a opening keynote address at the World Congress on Health and Safety in Sydney. Before we get into talking about the message you delivered during the opening keynote, tell us what the experience was like for you. Did you ever imagine yourself on a global stage like that?
You know what? This was an experience that I didn't expect to feel how I ended up feeling when I said yes to the opportunity, to be honest with you. So I guess two parts. Did I ever imagine myself on a global stage? Absolutely. I'm a bit of the sky's the limit kind of gal. So I hoped for that, and I envisioned that, and I put that out into the universe. What I didn't envision or expect or even understand until it happened to me was what they call imposter syndrome. I hear people talking about imposter syndrome, and I would always think, I don't know what that is. I have no clue what you're talking about. I get the concept, but it just didn't resonate with me. And leading up to the event, for the first time in 25 years of speaking, my anxiety was through the roof. I was having nightmares that my leg was falling off on stage, that no one laughed at a joke, that I forgot to show up, that I didn't, it was almost just like that reoccurring dream that you didn't graduate, or you didn't show up for your test. It was a real manifestation of anxiety and fear and feelings that I was really unfamiliar with feeling in anticipation for me doing my work. So yeah, it was quite a ride, I have to say.
So how was that feeling when you got on stage?
Thank goodness, it was all wrong. I am meant to be doing what I'm meant to be doing, but I've had goodness, we'd need a few podcasts to really dive into it. For me, it had nothing to do what I recognized, and I had a bit of a sense prior to the event anyway. It really had nothing to do with the world stage. It had nothing to do with thousands of people. It had to do with one person, and that one person was my father. I've never shared my story in front of my father, and he is my everything. He is my hero, and I love my mother equally, but our relationship is a bit different, and there are some very hard-hitting aspects that are difficult to share no matter how many times I do it, that involve my father in my presentation, in my story. And I was really concerned about, would he have a heart attack? Would he have to walk out? Like, I had an exit strategy planned. I had somebody from the conference sitting with my mother and father in case he took, a bad spell, as we would say in the Maritimes. Like, I really was worried that it was going to be too much for him. And I gave him an out a couple of times and said, Dad, if you don't want to go. And he said, of course I'm going to go. If I'm going all the way to Australia, So maybe it was me who wanted the out. I don't know. But I guess what I realized, Pearlie, is that I've spoken to probably close to 1 million people, but I don't know that I've ever spoken my truth to my family. I've always just made it out to be, I wouldn't say sugar-coated it, but I don't like talking about the hard stuff in front of the people who love me the most, because from day one, to me, that makes it harder for them. And you want to protect your loved ones, and that's just one other aspect of how you do that. You keep them from hearing the hard stuff, So I walked on stage and it all melted away, and I didn't even look in their direction. I knew where they were sitting. And it was the first time for my fiance as well, but third time for my mom. And I didn't look in their direction. And once I started chatting and talking, and I started my beginning in a different way, I basically just admitted I was nervous. Because what I tell all these companies I work with when they say, well, what's one of the most, important things we can do as leaders? I say, be vulnerable. Open up the space for other people who you are surrounded with to be okay with not being okay today or tomorrow. Don't put on this face and facade that everything is okay and it's perfect and this is what strength looks like. So in the last final second, I basically changed everything when I walked out on stage and talked about being vulnerable.
So what was your message? We'll come back to your dad in a moment, but what was your message to the audience?
Oh goodness, it's hard for me to ever sum it up in one sentence. But the overarching theme of my message, no matter who I'm speaking to, is that if we want to make safety matter, we have to make safety personal. So whatever that means for you, it's something different for everyone. Another overarching theme of mine is that sharing stories changes lives and that sharing stories can save lives. And as a speaker, it's my job to share stories, but as, humans, anyone who sits in the seat that's listening to me, every person has at least one story to share that could matter to somebody on a certain day, in a certain moment, for a particular reason. And oftentimes we never understand the weight of our words and why what we said mattered or why it's important that we say what we feel. So I think that really in the mix of talking about what happened to me and the impact on my family, and those are kind of more of the details, but the higher level themes would be making it personal and engaging with our own personal experiences to inspire others to be safe.
Given such a diverse group, how did you decide what the message was that you would want to deliver?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. What I always try to look for is what do we have in common? And what every person sitting in the chair would have had in common on that day and every day is that they are, each and every one of them, the most important person to somebody. So the world revolves around you, Pearlie, for somebody. The world revolves around me for somebody, right? And so if we can think about those people as being the people that we're out there really working for, that kind of shifts the perspective a little bit, I think. Another common ground, another thing we all have in common is that nobody's invincible. So we could all be affected by an injury. And then the third thing would be that we all have the ability to prevent these things from happening by speaking up, learning more, promoting more awareness. So I guess I just, I really wanted to just speak to people as humans who are loved, as humans who love.
So what was your father's reaction? Did you have a chance to talk to him afterwards?
My father is a man of few words, and especially when he's emotional. So I did tell the part that I was scared to tell about him in my presentation. I won't get into it, but it's a very concise story with a heavy hitting final, what's the word I'm looking for, conclusion. And I did start to cry on stage a little bit, and I managed to bring it back around. And after it was all over, my mom and dad and fiance Sean came up for pictures and to see me. And I just said to my dad, he said, "Good job, dear." I said, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Oh yeah. Had a few moments there. I'll survive. He wouldn't sit down and tell me, this is what I thought, or when you said this. I tell a story about him using duct tape to patch up everything. And he said, "I think you embellished that a little bit." And I said, "Well, in fact, I didn't, Dad."
Yeah.
So anyway, it certainly was it's the bravest thing I've ever done. Ever.
So what was your mother's reaction?
My mom was just, as always, beaming. I remember, Pearlie, when we started working together, it didn't matter if I was speaking at a high school to 20 kids, or even when I did the first WHSCC then conference, and I think it was St. John maybe, or Fredericton, I can't remember. My mom is my biggest fan, and while she hasn't sat through many, she knew what to expect. So for her, I think it was less about having to hear the story because she already knew what she was in for, and more about the excitement of the grandeur of the actual event and the honor, of having the opportunity to take the world stage. And it was nice because we had lots of time for Q&A at the end, and I was asked, because there were not quite a few, but there were a couple of sets of other parents there that lost kids in the workplace, that they had booths and whatnot. And the question was, about, does your mother advocate as a parent? And I said, well, not directly, but it takes a village, and so for me to do this work, I can't do this on my own, and it's because of the support of my family that I can do it. So she does advocate, just in a bit of a different way.
So what other kinds of questions would they have asked you?
Well, I actually had the opportunity to talk about the work that we did years ago with Paul and with Passport to Safety. So I was asked about, I made the joke, I said, it almost seemed like I planted the guy there to plug my new Step Up program, because he said, what's happening within the education system in Canada, and how is that different than Australia? So it was a neat little, what's the word? I was able to make that connection because obviously in New Brunswick, we were the first to do Passport to Safety with Paul, and Paul at the same time had been working in Australia with Safe Communities Foundations and with Passport to Safety. So now it's kind of full circle where I'm back in New Brunswick doing my Step Up Your Safety program within the school systems. So I guess to in a nutshell, I felt like I got to brag about not only Canada, but the work that we were doing in New Brunswick, The other questions too, like there were questions about, and there always are, and I always forget to mention it, what happened at the mill afterwards. The mill doesn't operate anymore. So I forget all the time to mention that. Just questions about what the trends are globally, that we're seeing throughout the world with regard to health and safety and the attitudes. So there were a lot of interesting questions, for sure.
So now, did you have a chance to hear many other presentations, other speakers while you're at the conference?
Pearlie, I'm going to be real honest with you. I was at the hotel with my bags packed and out as soon as the coffee break was over. I was so stressed out about it that the minute it was over, I already had plans to be out of Sydney. So I did go speak with exhibitors and meet some of the people who were speaking at the event and whatnot, but I didn't stay to listen to more presentations or anything like that. I was just so relieved that the work went over well, and I was exhausted.
Did you have any chance to do any other presentations when you were in Australia?
No, I didn't, and by design. I really just wanted my focus to be solely on this one presentation. But I did stay in Australia and take my mother and father and my fiance. We traveled around for 2 weeks after that. So we went 5 days ahead of time to adjust to jet lag. I was actually quite ill, so thank heavens I had the time to get better and feel better for my event. But no, I didn't do any other presentations this time around. But that's my 4th time speaking in Australia. So I've worked throughout the whole country on 3 different occasions.
So what's Australia like from the point of view of health and safety? You always hear a lot about them.
Yeah.
And what they're doing. They seem to be leading edge in a lot of cases. What's your take on health and safety in Australia?
Oh yes, they're proactive. I think if I could sum it up, I don't like to get too technical because it's more of a feeling as opposed to a fact. But I even know from back when I was affiliated with Passport to Safety and Safe Communities, even then they were in retirement homes, they were offering padding for people who had mobility issues, knowing that a fall and a break or a fracture would speed up the time between then and them possibly passing away, right? There was a direct correlation between a fall and death. So they actually started offering padding. I mean, that's just one example that I remember from a long time ago, but in the same vein, they seem to be very proactive, and they don't wait until things go wrong before they implement new strategies and whatnot. So the other thing I would say is that I think I would have to say similar to Canada. You've got your big cities, but you've got a lot of rural farmland. You've got places that people have more of a country mentality. And I'm not saying that as in a good or bad, but a little bit maybe less conservative with regard to rules and regulations, So, I mean, I think that in the work that I've done, I've worked within, Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, but I've also worked in Tamsworth, Newcastle, places that are smaller. And so I do see a lot of similarities between Australia and Canada.
So a long flight to Australia, long flight back.
Yeah.
I'm sure you had a lot of time to think on the way back. What were your thoughts on the way back? About how you felt?
I was so grateful. I mean, what an amazing thing to be able to do, to have the opportunity and the means to bring your family halfway across the world for, something so monumental. So, I mean, I was elated. I was relieved. I was so encouraged because the feedback was incredible. I received so much support for my message, which meant a lot given the level of anxiety I had going into it, and there's already been opportunities popping up for more work. But yeah, I just felt really, really grateful and really, really happy. And also, I can't even get over it. This year, it's, if I have to go last week, I think I was speaking in 6 different places doing speeches, and I'm back to the way I used to be when my father's not in the audience. If I had to feel like that every time I had to do a big event, I wouldn't do this work. I wouldn't be able to handle it. So it's also neat being on the other side of it now, because it does make me realize just how stressed out, and nervous and how much I cared, really. Stressed out is maybe not the right word, but yeah, because now it's just back to normal. So relieving. It's so happy.
So now we're in 2024.
Yes.
What all do you have on your schedule this year?
Well, next week I'll be off to deliver a speech in Houston on Tuesday, Alabama on Wednesday, LA on Friday, Niagara on Monday, and on and on and on. I just returned from Doha. I was, working in Qatar, and I'll be returning there to do some more work in the Middle East in May. And that's wild because, I mean, they don't use car seats. They don't what I love about the work is, again, finding that common ground. So they do not have the same safety standards. I'm not going to quantify it as better or worse. I'm not to say that, but certainly the fact of the matter is that children are in cars without seatbelts and car seats. That's different. We're not used to that, right? So what I loved was having that challenge and that opportunity to change the narrative, but not at the same time, to just talk to people as someone who is loved and who loves, and to say, how can we be better? How can we be honest about where we are right now so that we can improve where we're going tomorrow, and some other neat things. So, there's just loads of work travel coming up, but in New Brunswick, Step Up Your Safety, The school program is in pilot phase. So I'm fingers crossed that will be implemented into personal wellness. And it's being used throughout the province of Ontario successfully right now with co-op students. And I'm traveling to Saskatchewan in September to do a tour where we're launching it officially throughout the entire province of Saskatchewan, with partnership with the group called Service Hospitality. And so that's all exciting. And I'll be trying to forge more inroads this year with other provinces to get this implemented into the curriculum. And one thing that I'm feeling very passionate about is really using this opportunity to talk about the importance of a program like this beyond anything technical, beyond co-op. I mean, if you're in a co-op program, yes, there's a workplace component, so obviously it's a natural fit, but your teacher already vetted your employer. They know where you're going to work. So what about the other 90% of the kids who are not part of a co-op program but are employed and have no one vetting who their employers are? So to me, that's why it's so important that we don't limit programs like mine or any programs with regard to safety to programs in school that seem to only to have that component, you know?
Mm-hmm. Now, when you do your presentations for industrial clients, and you seem to do a lot of those for different organizations, what's your message to them? When you have an industrial group, some sort of hard-hitting construction workers or manufacturing or mining workers, what's the message you leave with them?
I'm on repeat here, but again, it's back to being human. You're someone's dad. When they hear the story about my father, they might think of their daughter. They might think of their father. They might think, it's about making it personal. But I will say, I definitely focus a little bit more on your responsibility to set a good example. Good might not be the right word, but I always say people don't need to be approaching you physically to ask you a question. That they're looking to you for answers in your actions. So sometimes we think, oh, they must know what they're doing. They haven't asked me anything. Maybe they haven't. But I certainly only walked over the conveyor belt because I watched other people who I trusted knew what they were doing do it. So when I'm working in industrial situations where we have a lot of turnover these days. There's a lot of new people coming into these industries, but there are also a significant, percentage of people who have been lifers, 20, 30, 40 years in the industry. And complacency is a challenge with that level of experience. And so it's my goal to reframe safety for those people into thinking into a way where they're thinking about, well, what I do, maybe I think it's okay for me, but would I be okay with my grandson learning that? Would I be okay with my nephew or my niece learning that? You have to think about what you're doing and how it impacts the behaviors of other people and we think of safety as an obligation, but I'm hoping and I'm feeling that it's happening more often now that we're seeing it as an opportunity, more so than an obligation, an opportunity to make a difference, an opportunity to change course, an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to learn, and to really open our minds and knowing that if we're still killing 3, 4, 5 people a day that we know of in this country, my goodness, we still have a long way to go.
So I know you're busy, so we'll finish up with one final question. What does your fiancé think of your presentations when he listened to it in Australia?
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to ask him afterwards? What did he say?
Yeah, he was very proud. And I mean, he's heard bits and snippets because he's watched me produce my videos and do online content. And so, I mean, he definitely had a sense of what I talk about. but I had a very, very massive, beautiful bouquet of flowers waiting for me in the room afterwards. I think it was very special for him to be there with my parents like that, and to see me for the first time on the world stage. But he keeps me grounded. He doesn't pump my tires too much. but he's very proud of me.
I bet he is.
Yeah.
Well, look, Candace, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Keep up all the good work you're doing. Certainly, I don't know how you do it because you seem to be here, there, and everywhere, but keep doing it. And thank you very much for joining us on our podcast. For our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think. If you have topics you'd like for us to feature, you can always reach us at podcast@ssnb.ca. Stay safe. See you next week.
Thanks, Curly.